Guys in real estate.
I am Chris Kelso, the maestro of mortgage.
I am Rob Cook, the godfather of real estate.
And I'm Joe Orsack, the king of credit swing. And together, we're the Real Estate Rat Pack. Much like us, real estate right now is smoking hot. So whether it's buying, selling, or owning, you need to check out the Real Estate Rat Pack.
They're here to take your calls and answer your questions live. Call now 1-800-808-5548. And now, the Real Estate Rat Pack!
Every week.
Every week. We're a legend in our own mind.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, we're going to be talking about legends today.
That is correct.
Legends today. But we are going to do a shout-out. We had a great trip to Lake Charles.
Yes.
Went to the Golden
I
Nugget.
thought you were going to say county.
And
Want to thank Officer Dan.
for letting us go. we appreciate the pass. We had a great time. We had some wonderful realtors with us, and
that is correct.
Everyone had fun on the bus, and we had to do a shout out to Michelle, who at the Golden Nugget just took really good care of. 'Cause she's supposed to be listening right now on streaming.
That is correct. You know, and the interesting thing about we saw over in Louisiana was everyone had like their last name was all the same. It was Michelle Bartender.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fertitta must have hired everyone from one family.
He signed a whole bunch of people from the same family. I guess.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it was
sure.
Michelle Bartender, Dan Bartender, Tiffany Bartender. Yes, pretty interesting stuff. But no, we had a great time. It was a lot of fun. We appreciate all of our great sponsors who actually sponsored the bus. More importantly, we all had a really good time. We all dazzled each other. It was absolutely a lot of. It was dazzling.
We were absolutely dazzled, and we did work that into the conversation. So I'm glad we fulfilled our obligations that we were given to us on the bus.
That is correct.
It's working to dazzle. Also, I've got a next week. You remember our NRG group? That's a Young Realtors group.
Right.
They're doing a fun run.
That is correct.
Fundraiser, and it's going to be at Terry Hershey Park around Eldridge and Memorial. Sign up is around 7:30. The race begins at 8:30.
Yes.
So if you want to know any more information about it, feel free to give us a call. You can reach me at 281-543-0527, and I'll get you all the details.
Absolutely. And it's a great stuff out there. I actually was going to be there until you reminded me we got to be on radio next week. So
Yes, our guests insist that we show up.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree.
So I've been working a long time to get this man on the show, and he finally acquiesced. And again, I rented that word. I have to take it back tomorrow.
Okay, gotcha.
And this man is a legend himself, and he's written a book about Houston legends. And we're going to talk a little about that, but we want to talk a little bit about his past and like that. So, Hank Moore, welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
And this is one of the most interesting people I've ever met, and he has got stories. He's a raconteur, which is what I posted on Facebook. He's got some great stories.
Raccoon, what?
Raccoon, exactly.
Yeah.
So
You take raccoons on tour?
let's start off with let's do a Reader's Digest version of where you started and talk about the Johnson White House and let's get past that and then let's get into that book.
Yeah, I'm an old timer in every sense of the word. I started working when I was 10 years old, and a brand new TV show had just come on the air at the time called American Bandstand. And I wanted to be the Dick Clark of Texas radio, and I was at one time. And before I became a world-renowned visionary, and I was told that was what I needed to be. And so my girlfriend told her father to put me to work. And so I went to work for her father, and I very quickly learned that radio station in Austin, Texas, Radio 59, was a sideline to what the real core business was. And that was the first time I ever heard the term core business. And I asked my then mentor, a 24-year-old newscaster at the radio station by the name of Bill Moyers, he said, "Suck it up, kid. You're not going to be Dick Clark. You're going to be a world-class visionary." And I didn't know what that word meant. You know, I was playing hit records of the day, and the biggest star in America came in our studio one day for an interview wearing an Army uniform. His name was Elvis Presley. That was a big deal, you know. And he said, "You're not going to be Dick Clark. You can like someone, you can admire someone, but you can't go through life as a carbon copy of them. And part of your zest is to be your own best, and you're supposed to tell other people how and other companies how to be their own best." So That's what I've been doing for 57
Well, tell him
years.
who your girlfriend's father was.
Lyndon Johnson. The girlfriend was Lucy Johnson, the younger daughter of the two. You know, Linda Bird was her older sister. And so that was an interesting, that was interesting. So she told her father to put me to work, but it was always assumed that I'd be part of the company business because her mother, Lady Bird, who was like a second mother to me. I mean, we were 10 years old. We were kids in the 5th grade, and Lady Bird was like a second mother to me. And she and my parents had gone to school together at UT back in the 30s, so they were old friends. So, that was even before she was a Johnson. Her real name was Claudia Taylor. And so I started working for them, and Mario said to me one day, "Hey, kid, music is a hobby. The radio is a short term. It's a young person's business. You've got to be a visionary thinker." And he said, "And by the way, this is not our core business. Broadcasting is not our core business. This is how the boss makes money. But I said, what is our core business? And he said, Washington, D.C. And he said, the reason you and I and others are here is we're being groomed for if and when our boss ever becomes president. And this was in January of 1958. And so by the time our boss became president in November of 1963, I'd had 5.5 years of grooming for that job. And my first assignment on that job was I was on the committee that wrote the Civil Rights Act of 64 as a 16-year-old kid. And no one asked you what you know. That's the thing about being young. Young people, if they only realized it, can rule the world. But in my era, I was taught that young people would become sponges and absorb all the wisdom of older people. And that's how I got to know a lot of the legends, was just by hanging around older people, asking stories about the good old days, and interpolating those stories to the future, because future and strategy is all about retreading the past. People don't understand that. Some people live in the past, but how we learn from the past and how we grow, that's the future. That's what everything is about, you know. And in business, I mean, I'm already predicting the next recession in 10 years. We won't talk about that. But what I'm also predicting is small business, and which is such a will to live and succeed, is going to stave that recession off from happening, because it's all about and certain industries, notably real estate, certainly financial, certainly retail. I have chapters about all those industries in the book, are the backbones of our community, and real estate and building is a very, very large part of it. And so it had been suggested to me many years ago that I start doing histories, and my early histories were written about music and the entertainment. You know, one day my other mentor, Cactus Pryor, I walked in one Saturday morning and he said, that guy from Lubbock just died in a plane crash. That's your music. That's young people's music, that rock and roll. Would you document it? I mean, this was February 3rd, 1959, also known in the song American Pie as the day the music died. Actually, the music was reborn that day. So that was, but the death of Buddy Holly, next thing I knew, I was doing documentaries on the history of rock and roll. Then I did the history of big band music and jazz. And so that's how during that limited time frame when I was in radio, I was a golden oldie maven. And I would look at the current music as the oldies of the future. So, and then as time went on, I wrote the history of Hollywood and television. And that was my second bestseller book, was the classic television reference. And that was the one that got me on Oprah. And my plan, basically, once I started writing books, I've done 8 now. Every other book is a serious business book. Every other book is more of an entertainment book. And we can learn about business from it, but it's meant to be entertaining. So Houston Legends is entertaining, and it's 42 years in the making.
Well, it is. I mean, one of the things, ever since you've been here this morning, I am a very fast book reader, by the way. But interesting stuff. I'm already on page 140, by the way.
Before we get on to the Houston Legend, I do want to hear, he is enrolled in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Because of that earlier work.
The DJ. So
really?
You were a DJ for how long?
Actually, even though people kept telling me to stop doing it,
You didn't listen.
I kept doing it on the side, actually for 24 years. And then it was kind of funny. It was one of the legends that sucked me into radio in Houston. I had been, I did 5 years as a White House advisor. My areas were civil rights, environmental, international trade, and the World's Fair. But I kept occasionally DJing at the Johnson radio station just because people kept telling me to stop doing it. And it was the later years that I met the Beatles and, other people like that. And so I kind of did it on the side because I wanted to document, and I made about 150 documentaries. 7 of them were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. When the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame really got going in the early 90s, they went around the country and they picked, what the public doesn't know, there's 7 sections, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Everybody knows about the performers. Right. But they don't know that there's a technology section. There's a DJ section. There's a songwriter section. There's a music industry marketing and promotion section. And they, it's kind of like at the Oscars, they say, we had a banquet last night and honored all these people you're never going to see on TV. That's what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame did also. So they went around the country and they picked DJs from different parts of the country. And when I found out I was being inducted, I said, oh, darn. I said another word that you can't say on the radio. And I said, because I was in my early 40s, and when you're young, you want to be taken seriously as a business leader. And to tell people that you had this earlier life is, I found embarrassing. And the irony of all ironies was, I emceed a movie premiere with Sonny and Cher in 1967 in Austin, Texas at the Paramount Theater. It was their first movie called Good Times. Darned if when I was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who should happen to induct me 25 years later but Sonny and Cher. They had divorced at that point. Sonny was in Congress. It was shortly before he died. But they were going around and summarily picking people that had contributed over the years, and that would include people in Houston like Bill Young and Paul Berlin, who are in my book. They're in the media chapter. But it was just, sometimes they induct you for old work that you did a long time ago. And mine was that I was interested in preserving oldies and history of music, and then later Hollywood history, and then later business history. So this book and my next book, which is American Business Legends, which I've been working on for 8 years, is the national version of Houston Legends, but it includes a lot of case studies. It includes living history interviews that I did with Tom Peters, Stephen Covey, Peter Drucker, W. Edwards Deming, a lot of the people that I knew and worked with. Some of them are no longer with us. Some still are, Lee Iacocca, Jack Welch. If someone doesn't preserve those living histories, who's going to?
That's a really good point. Chris is over there reading the book, and you can be pretty well versed on it. So, but
he's reading the medical science.
I went on
technology
medical science.
chapter.
I've gone through already retail. I've gone through energy so far.
Well, you are a fast reader.
Oh, I'm an extremely fast reader. But one of the things we're going to get into, obviously, we're coming up with a break here in a few minutes. It's just absolutely amazing if you look at our economy nowadays. If you look at everything social wise, you look at everything economic wise, you look at everything medical wise. Port of Houston. In fact, one of the things that would happen to be very interesting, I was actually listening to the History Channel the other day, and how Houston, because of the hurricane of 1900, really propelled Houston into becoming what it is today.
It was the financial center.
And our legends that you mentioned in here, I mean, it's written on the streets of all throughout Houston, as you mentioned in your book. I mean,
there's a chapter on the streets.
Exactly.
Who everything's named for.
Exactly. Who's everything's named for. And it's really interesting to see some of those great items that you can actually go to a single area now and read about it.
Yeah. And the book has its own website. By the way, so the book will not be in bookstores until May or June. This is a nationally published New York book. This is not a self-published. All of mine are New York published. And it will be on Amazon. That will not happen until late May, early June.
Late May, early June.
But after the break, we're going to give them the website where they can go and order.
There's one place and I'll be doing a lot of events in the community during the coming months. I've done maybe 3 already. And some of them are going to be private events. One of them is going to be at River Oaks Country Club. I'll be doing some Chambers of Commerce, of course.
Well, Hank, we're going to interrupt you really fast because we have to take a break to all of our studio sponsors. But stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we're back with Hank Moore, who has been speaking and will be speaking for the rest of the show here.
This is the first time we've featured someone with those shows. I think we could probably fill up 2 or 3 shows.
Absolutely, I would absolutely agree. And I'm enthralled in the book over here, Houston Legends. So I'm being extremely quiet because I'm trying to read the whole book before the show's over with.
I'll lend you my copy.
Thank you very much.
Hank could probably get you a copy, or you can go online and buy a copy.
Yeah,
that is true.
And so,
and it has its own website, www.houstonlegends.net.
I just wanted to say that Chris and Rob and myself were proud to say that we made it in your book.
Yeah.
Albeit via a great signature.
Of course, it was
this morning
handwritten, and it was this morning. But but we did make it in the book.
It's also
Houston
got
Legends.
the date on it. I learned from my colleague Tony Robbins that you always put the date at the bottom, and of course it adds to the time to signing the books. I was doing a conference a couple of days ago, and it was people were standing in line for half an hour. I'm not used to that. That was interesting. And I was writing to so-and-so, name, message, date. They said, why do you write so much? I said, so someone will cherish it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's, you know who I learned that from? The very first autograph I ever got when I was working in 1958 in Austin. And they turned me loose on the board. It was that old Collins board, and we had these old 3 16-inch Gates turntables. And it was one of the first times the adults turned me loose to sit on the air on the board. And the door swung open to the radio station, and this Army soldier walked in. He said, "Hi, I just thought I'd stop in and do an interview." And he sat down, and I saw which Army soldier it was. It was Elvis. And I promptly pulled his latest hit record and got him to sign it right there.
Awesome. That's awesome.
That's where I learned that.
I don't know if I'd kept the presence of mind to have done that. I would probably have been sitting there going,
But a 10-year-old child has no fear.
Yeah.
And doesn't know that. And I asked Elvis, the first question I asked him was, what are they feeding you in the Army? He said, I like burned bacon. That's how he got to where he loved burned bacon the rest of his life, was because when he was doing his basic training, most people go, Elvis in Texas? I thought he served in Germany. Yes, he did for 2 years. But during those 6 weeks before, you got to get basic training somewhere. And he got it at Fort Hood in Killeen. And he'd come down and hang out in Austin during that 6-week period. So, yeah, you learn those things.
I love that stuff. I was going to come back to the book because we do have some great legends in here that people hear these names all the time, and we're talking about like MD Anderson and things like that. We're just so used to rolling it off our tongues, we don't stop to think about what the history was.
They were real people, and the funny thing about it, this is what got me into all this. When I was working for the Johnsons, they used to have the most lively parties. They were these great big things. I knew
they were partiers.
And they were. And he drank a lot, never on the job. His drink of choice in the White House was Diet Fresca. And in the 60s, diet soft drinks were rancid. They didn't taste like real soft drinks. And he made us drink that nasty stuff. And out of Dixie cups. And the only time I was ever called on the carpet, and it literally was the White House Oval Office carpet by a boss, I criticized his drink serving policy in front of the rest of the staff. I was 17 years old. I just graduated from high school. It's the summer of 65. And I said, we were sitting around we were talking about how Southerners were not perceived as intellectually superior to people from Massachusetts who had just gone out of power. And we were always talking about how we were smarter And I said, but it's our job to show it to people. And, Johnson would talk about how he would use the Southern drawl for effect to disarm people. And I held up his Dixie cup, and I said, the problem is people see this cup and symbolize us. Kennedy used to serve his guests in crystal glasses. And he looked at me, the only time I was called on the carpet by a president of the United States, he said, son, we don't do anything like Kennedy. I said, we do them better because we're smarter. And it's our job to show people that. He turned to me and he said, good comeback.
Now, you advised other presidents. So what other presidents?
George H.W. Bush. I was one of the people with 1,000 Points of Light, and I've appeared with three others, and some of them were at the economic summits. And the last I've spoken at 6 economic summits. The first one was at Rice University here in Houston. The last one, interestingly, this gets into my Bill Cosby story.
That's a hot topic right now.
A very hot topic. But it's about 3 or 4 years ago. I was on stage at Temple University in Philadelphia. It was my last economic summit. And I was talking about the lessons we should have learned from the recession and the corporate downsizing. And I made a comment that he was reading my introduction, and in his Fat Albert voice, because he, as a graduate of Temple University, was there appearing. And he's reading, and he says, well, I have introduced you before. I remember you. It was here, wasn't it? Like a comedy routine. And I said, yes, Fat Albert. It was in 98. I was the warm-up act to Colin Powell at the Nonprofit Summit. And I was the nobody, and Colin Powell was the star. And this was something Bill Clinton, who I never met, was a summit to talk about nonprofit and community issues. I was there because of the volunteer work I'd done with George H.W. Bush on 1,000 Points of Light. And the whole premise of that program was if you thank someone for serving our community, you'll inspire them to do more. That's all it was about. It was about giving out awards and recognition. And the second President Bush was getting ready to resurrect that program when 9/11 happened. So 1,000 Points of Light is still around. His brother Neil Bush runs it now, and it's still a very viable program.
I think people do need recognition on that. More so than remuneration. They want recognition. So I always think
one of my quotes in the book. I have another chapter called Quotes, and it was from one of my mentors, a fellow named Seymour Cohen. Slugger Cohen ran an ad agency here in town called Gulf State Advertising, and his quote was, "You do your best work for free." Meaning that the work you do on community and charity events is symbolic of what people could pay you to do. So anyway, but how I met the legends was at these parties, and people from Houston would come up, and I met all the biggies except for Jesse Jones, who had died before that. He died in 56, and I started meeting people at these events beginning in 58, 59, and there was I'm a Hog and Mrs. Hobby. And all of these people, George Mitchell, and it was not for political reasons. Of course, in those days, everybody in Texas was a Democrat, including Rick Perry. But it was, we would party, and you'd be standing in the buffet line talking to someone. I remember I was standing there chit-chatting with someone one time. I didn't know who he was. And it was Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of West Germany, for goodness sakes. And so you talk to all these people, and then they'd share their stories. So I guess that's where I started. And then what brought me to Houston, you want to talk?
No, you're doing great.
No, keep going.
Moved here after my people left power in Washington. That's not a political comment. When you're out of power, you're out of power. And that was January 20th, 1969. The other guy came in, who some of us did not vote for. In fact, I stayed on into the other guy's administration for 6 weeks. I was on a committee that set up the Environmental Protection Agency. And but anyway, so then I came back and I finished my schooling at UT in Austin, and that was in my senior year. Then I got my MBA, And then what brought me to Houston was I got a call one day from Norman Hackerman, Dr. Hackerman. Now, you mentioned that name in Houston, and everybody associates him with the 25 years that he was president of Rice University. Before that, he was president of UT Austin. And he called me one day, and that's what brought me to Houston. That's what led me to start Houston Legends. He said, I just recommended you for a consulting assignment. I said, where? He said, Houston. He said, what do you know about University of Houston? I said, well, I know they want to be us, meaning UT. And he said, that's right. And your job is to tell them how to be their best. And so I came here as a 25-year-old kid, and my first assignment was to tell the University of Houston Administration and Board of Regents how to create the UH system, because I had been on the committee that did it up in Austin. And I happened to be on the committee that meant the most to them. And I kept telling them, you got to stop. So the first legend that took a liking to me, who I'd also met through those parties at the LBJ Ranch, was Mrs. Wortham, for whom the Arts Complex is named downtown. So she came into my office one day. I just started working there. I had an office in the E. Cullen building. And I was 25 at the time. She was 70. And that's where I learned you absorb the knowledge from all those old timers. So, because I was, the boy wonder in the first 35 years of my career, then I got old. And so I learned from all those people. So she came in one day, she said, you tell me true. And she used to say in grandmotherly terms, what's the biggest problem with this institution? I said, ma'am, they think they're UT Junior. But ma'am, my fervent wish for this institution is that it be its best. So next day, Dr. Hoffman comes into the office. He said, you're good with old people. Would you handle them? And I said, sir, you're talking about your board of regents. I'm still 25 and my scope of work keeps expanding. Next day, he said, yeah. Tell us the leadership stuff later, but in the meantime, handle them. Well, they came in my office en masse the next day, including George Mitchell and Mrs. Hobby. And Mitchell said, we want you to tell us how to allocate our money. I said, I'm still 25 and my scope of work keeps changing. And he said, I said, I would encourage the University of Houston to be its own best and not live in the shadows of UT Austin. He said, explain that further. I pointed out the window. I said, see that building over there? That's a Hilton College of Hotel and Restaurant Management, had just been built. That's world class. My guys in Austin don't have that. See that building over there? That's the College of Optometry. Yeah, I'll wrap it up. We don't, it's time for a break. Or as we used to say in radio, time for a little pause for the cause, as we see by the old clock on the wall. So Mitchell said, what about that ugly building over there? Should we bulldoze it? I said, no, I'd give them money. That's called the College of Technology. I don't know what they do there, but something tells me that's related to the future. This was 1973, and I didn't know what they did.
That's when they had mainframe computers.
And it's the only time George Mitchell ever suggested bulldozing anything.
Oh, my
well,
these are the kinds of stories when you're there in these meetings, people talk in down-home kind of ways.
Well, we're going to continue to have these stories told right after this break, by the way.
For the cause.
After a pause for the cause. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I totally think
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we're back.
And we're here with Hank Moore. We're just having a great time. I can't believe how fast this half hour has gone. But Chris is over there reading the book instead of paying attention to the show. He's just fascinated by this book. And you were mentioning some people. We were just talking about University of Houston.
Right.
About some of the graduates.
Well, Hank was talking about the University of Houston, and sometimes I think it gets lost in translation. A&M's a really good school, and University of Texas is a really good school, and Texas Tech is a really good school. But University of Houston has some, is a very, very good university in and of its own right. And we've had some very interesting business leaders that have actually graduated from there. I mean, Tillman Fertitta, who we were just at one of his properties yesterday. Yeah. Rod Kenyon, of Compaq.
Right.
University of Houston. I mean, so and you go down this list. I mean, you talk about a lot of different individuals that are out there. Hofheinz, obviously, have all graduated from there. Van Horn. Then you have a lot of the sports legends that have graduated from there. I mean, but a lot of very good individuals who have contributed to a social and economic reform and growth of Houston all come out of the University of Houston.
That's
People
amazing.
don't realize how good of a university it is.
It was world class when I worked there in 1973, and they didn't realize it then. I started to say, well, I guess it's not X-rated. Mrs. Wortham, every time somebody would do something dumb, she would sit in the meetings and say, well, Cougar High is as Cougar High does. And that's an expression no one uses anymore. It's not politically correct because it's a world-class university, and it was then. But anyway, I met those people, and this is how this all happened. Nick, and then Mrs. Hobby leaned over to me one day during a Board of Regents meeting and said, we need to get you back in radio. That sucked me back in for 9 years. So I was doing a Sunday night big band show at KPRC, her station. Then I trained a guy named Ronnie Renfro to take my place. Then I moved over to KULF. And then I was at Kilt, and that was the only radio station where I had to talk in the Bill Young voice. And that hurts your gut to talk that way. Bill Young. And it really, and then I moved over to Magic 102 where I got my highest rating, on Magic 102. And I pulled a 28.1 Arbitron, and I did the first black oldies show in the nation. That's what got me in the rock and roll. But anyway, the common thread of this community, if I had to say it in a few words, is community service. And Mrs. Wortham, and that's how I got to know the Mastersons and George R. Brown and Ben Love and all those people. And I realized years ago somebody has to immortalize these people because they will be forgotten. And this is the first history book. Ben Love's been in it. He's done more than his share for this community.
Big in banking, very big.
And all across the community. And I advised his heir apparent, Mark Shapiro, who's now vice chairman of the board of Chase Bank. And I was on their board when Lady Bird Johnson had me fulfill her unexpired term. But what I learned is that when you can lean over to someone at a charity meeting or a board meeting, that's where the best deals are cut. And people like Bob Cruikshank and Ben Love and some of those people, that's the whole backbone of the community. So once you get to know all of those people, they introduce you to all their friends. So that's how I met a lot of the legends. And people kept telling me for years, you got to write this book. First of all, you know how to write real books. Other people would like to but can't. And you knew most of them. And like George R. Brown was this elderly gentleman. I didn't know who he was originally. He was this nice guy I sat down to have lunch with one day at the Houston Club. And by the end of the meeting, he says, I want you to tell me how to create a program for my company. And you just tell me what you want to do, and I just want you to work with you. George R. Brown said that. I was 35 years old at the time. And so I created their first in-house daycare center. And you go, say, what? Daycare? It's all about improving the worker productivity. And yes, they could use it in the marketing too. And then I brought one. They said, oh, yeah, we're going to let out the contract to some national. I said, we're going to give it to an inner city daycare program from the hood. And then I brought neighborhood centers in, and that's what got them involved in corporate daycare, and that became a big deal for years. Well, somebody has to start those ideas. That's what I do and did then. And so then, but a lot of these people, these legends, are legends because they were everyday people who had great ideas. They weren't pompous. They weren't pretentious. And every swinging one of them did more than their share for the community. And some of them are still around, like my friend George Strake, the Strake oil fields and the Conroe, all that. And they've given and given and given and given to the community. And that's the common thread, And these younger people that are around today, I would encourage them to think and act and live like legends now, because if you do and you hang around the others, you'll be one. That was the lesson I learned.
Always, the more you give away, the more you get back. It's absolutely true.
And that concept is in one of my other books, The Business Tree, which was my third bestseller. It's called Potlatch, P-O-T-L-A-C-H-E. It's not a drug, but it makes you feel good. It's a Native American term. Potlatch is the giving of gifts. And when you give somebody your wisdom, your presence, your gift, you're giving them something that comes back to you multi times over.
I absolutely agree with that.
I've always said that. I've always said that, you give back usually tenfold what you give, and so that's why I'm very much into charity, into giving, because as you mentioned, Hank, it's that social atmosphere as well. You're able to go do well for the community, give to others. I mean, that's why I support a lot, especially things within our with children and cancer and heart surgeries and pediatric heart. And it's also something that's very close to my heart. So, I tell everybody also, don't do something for the wrong reason. Do something for the right reason, because you have a vested interest in the improvement of that area.
The people that Hank's writing about, of course, these people cared about their community, and they gave back with sincerity. I can tell the difference between people who give back sincerely and those that are trying to build a resume.
Oh, exactly. They're there are some of these corporate types, particularly that are there for the photo ops, but then the companies renege on the contribution, and that's not right. But for the right reasons, I mean, guys like George Herman, William Morris Rice, Monroe Dunaway Anderson, people don't even know that they think MD Anderson was a doctor. He was with Anderson Clayton, which Joe was talking about earlier. And they gave and gave and gave and gave and are still giving, And then the families of those people. My friend Stuart Stedman, who's chairman of the Wesley West Foundation. I mean, that family has done its share. And my friend Jay Jones, who's a grandson of Jesse Jones, he's still on the Houston Endowment Board. And they do a lot of stuff that they don't get credit for. And they don't want to get credit.
They're not looking for it. That's what makes them great leaders.
So it's those third generations. One thing about community and charity, that's a whole show y'all might want to do later and get prominent people from the real estate community who have literally built their business by being community leaders. And, we've got 5 generations in the workforce right now, and each of them has different working styles. And the neatest thing about that youngest, most of my books are written for the 2 younger generations. So when we talk about the old timers and what they learned, it's all through the prism of what young people can take back and move forward. And this youngest generation in the workforce right now, the millennials, have the integrity, and every generational things go in cycles. They've got what the greatest generation had, and they're bending over backward to get involved in the community, and I salute them for it. And this would be the youngest of the generations in the workforce.
And I call them the echo boomers because it's about the same size group as the boomers are.
It's actually larger from what I was recently.
Well, it's about 85 million, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And I wrote about them in one of my books. I guess it's The Business Tree. I've read so many books, sometimes I forget what was in what book. But and this book, I honestly can confess I haven't read it in about a year. I finished it. In fact, the last thing I did was...
I can confess I have read it recently.
Yeah. No, I've read pieces of it. I read the Pasadena section the other day before I talked to the Pasadena Rotary Club, so I could tell them about the fruit farming and the strawberry industry, which started out as a spinoff business of Texaco. It's in the energy chapter. But there's some great opportunities out there for business. No, I was going to say about real estate. I talked about in that chapter, which is chapter 2 or 3. Again, haven't read the table of contents lately. It's either before the energy chapter.
Yeah, real estate chapter 2.
Yeah, and banking and finances after that, and retail. But anyway, real estate, the development of each of the communities. Bob Lanier died recently. One of the pieces of trivia about Bob Lanier that's in the book was when he was doing real estate development, he would name streets in his development after flowers because his hobby was gardening.
Why not?
That's how a lot of that stuff happened. There's the Makawa Road, which I saw yesterday off of 610, was named for a Japanese-American World War II hero. And some of the streets are just, Stella Link was because 2 railroads came together. It was the link.
Oh, my.
And Tomball, the town Tomball, was named for a man named Thomas Ball. And Jersey Village was named for a dairy farm. So you learn all those things. The last thing in the book that I wrote, I had done in the real estate chapter, all the history of Montrose and River Oaks and all the developments. And I just finished the book about this time last year. And I thought, what's missing? And
They didn't do anything about the Rat
Well,
Pack.
you know, I think Josac should be the next city out there.
and I was, I said to my fiance Joan Wilhelm, I was sitting at a desk working, finishing up the book. I was sitting in Sugar Land, and I thought, oh, I better do all the surrounding areas too, since I'm sitting in Sugar Land. And they were already in the book, actually.
They're pretty rich in history.
In 1859, 100 years before it was incorporated, and Galveston and Bel Air were in the book, but I had to go out and do another week of research and get the history of, Huntsville and LaPorte and all those characters. And so everything in a 4-county, and that was the last thing I did, that last real estate section. I had just finished the book. I was getting ready to get back to my other work. I'd put all my work on the back burner to get that finished, and I was getting ready to hop a plane to go speak at a conference in Vegas. I happened to be sitting having lunch one day at a restaurant over in the River Oaks area when who happens to walk up to me at my table but Fred Hoffines.
I hadn't seen Fred in years.
No one has seen Fred in years. And he looks at me and he says, God, I haven't seen you in 20 years. You look the same. And I thought, well, I can't, say that, he was young Fred when he was mayor. He was in his 30s when he was mayor. And a lot of people don't remember him because he's a very quiet, mild-mannered guy. Kind of like Bill Gates, who I later met. But he said, wow. And I said, Fred, I've been living in the past. In recent months, I got the Astrodome on my mind. Would you come back? So the good thing about Legends over the next year when I do these events in the community, and one I'm hopefully will be for HAR, is I'm going to get Legends. I have commitments from every former living mayor to come up here. I've got commitments from Sharon Connolly, the daughter of John Connolly. I got people for other legends in the book like Denton Cooley who are itching to appear and talk about the good old days, with a focus on what we learned from the future.
And you've got Rob Cook.
Yes.
That's right.
That's right. What else could you ask for?
The godfather of real estate.
What we could ask for is a time to take a break.
Time to take a break. Time flies, you're having fun. And we got to take a pause for the cause.
We are so stealing that.
But stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we're back.
Yeah, this show has gone by lightning fast.
Yeah, all we have to do is say, so keep going, Hank.
And you were saying.
I don't dare talk about what's not in the book. That'd be a whole other show.
That would be, we are a family show, so we may not want to get into some of those issues, but I'm sure you've got a few that you might want to jot down before your memory starts lapsing.
Oh, no.
So, anyway, well, we were talking about isms.
Yeah, one of the things you have at the very last chapter of the book is yesterdayisms.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because there are some things in there on those isms that, you talk about trends and fashions and things that we say, things that cease to exist. For example, one of the things you said, things that cease to exist, locally produced children's TV shows.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, that's been a
Kitterick
complaint
the
forever.
Cat was the big deal here in Houston.
Right.
And Cadet Don. And we had the Uncle Jay show in Austin and Captain Gus in San Antonio. And we don't have that anymore. And I think kids are missing out. We have no more Captain Kangaroo. We have no more American Bandstand. That's
all
sad.
those gone. I would agree. I mean, it's one of those things. It's pretty interesting because you see some things that are out there that we just don't hear about anymore. You see some sayings that we've got out there that we just don't hear anymore. You talk about things, how technology. Remember telegraphs.
Yeah. One thing I have learned over the years is the past recreates itself. And you talk about things that made a comeback. I talked about telephone party lines. That became the internet.
You talk about ceiling fans.
Uh-huh.
The jitterbug and swing music, which I would agree. I think, hardwood
Lindy
floors.
Hop, all those kinds of musical styles came back.
Yeah, back in the 60s, everyone was covering up their hardwood floor with that. I got wall-to-wall carpet now. Now everyone's pulling it back up.
And sometimes the old is a good way. Sonny Bono, my friend Sonny Bono, wrote a song about that called The Beat Goes On. And it was all about how history recreates itself. And one of the things I would encourage people, even though and you know who I think is going to be the biggest interest audience in this book is not just the old timers, but it's going to be young people. They want to learn how George Herman made his money. and how Monroe Dunway Anderson did it. And Howard Hughes. And, one of the current big wigs of business, Jeff Bezos, is in the book. People don't know he had founder of Amazon. .com, and he was a student at River Oaks Elementary School. Then you got all those artsy people. What's his name? Jim Parsons from Big Bang Theory is from the area. Big stars.
My wife went to school with him.
Really? Yeah. Somewhere up in Spring or Woodlands or somewhere out there. And then and not to mention Jacqueline Smith and all those other people, and the Quaid brothers from Bel Air. And, but history does repeat itself. And when one of the things I do, I must get a plug in for big picture thinking, which very few people do. Those legends were big picture thinkers. And the problem with business right now is it's so fragmented and segmented. And you got consultants out there that are peddling their wares, and they're not ever thinking big picture. I just was at a conference and people were talking about upselling and all that stuff, and my head was dizzy. I was talking about big picture, and suddenly in the breakout I'm sitting through, they're talking about upselling. I nearly upchucked listening to that, because that's what people are talking, and that's one of those terms. I mean, there's certain other terms I would love to go out of style, including the most terrible word in the business vocabulary, and that's solutions. That's a vendor term. When somebody is peddling something, they call it a solutions. Most of us, the legends, dealt in opportunities, strategies, methodologies. That's what we should be talking about. And that's what I learned from a lot of old timers, and with the understanding that we just got to pass it on. There are 3 common reasons that Houston and the greater Houston area came about, including Sugar Land and LaPorte and all those guys. And they're all important. Katy, which was on the route of the railroad. That's one of the 3 things. The 3 commonalities about everything is, number 1 is a good place for business. It was started out as a good place for business, good place for business. And the Tillman Fertittas of the world are living proof of that. He grew up in Galveston, multicultural, multi-ethnic community. George Mitchell is from that era. Second commonality, every one of these communities was on the path for Texas independence. If Santa Anna marched here and Sam Houston came through here and Davy Crockett and all those characters, they're in the book, that's how the whole area came about. Third way, it was all about connections to the railroad and connections to shipping things to the port of Houston. Rob, you brought up something earlier, which is also in the book, is every time Galveston would make a misstep, either weather-wise, the weather in Galveston, that hurricane paved the way for the port of Houston. It paved the way for the oil industry in Pasadena. It paved the way for the farming and rice industries all out in Katy and Sugar Land and all of that. Every time Galveston had a misstep, either natural or of their own making, I don't know that the term "barn on the island" is in the book.
But it's alive and well down on the island.
It is a mentality, and I don't talk about the mafia in Galveston, how they chased all the gambling out to Las Vegas, and that's how Las Vegas. That's not in the book. But it's all about opportunities. People seized opportunities, and they were all good neighbors. In the olden days, everybody in Houston lived downtown. And people who worked together were neighbors.
Yeah, the Heights was considered the suburbs.
The 100th anniversary of the Heights is coming up. That's another thing. I have an article out about that. It's going to appear in Small Business Today magazine in another month or two, celebrating that magazine's birthday. I was on the cover of that one 3 years ago.
I went to that party.
Yeah, and the anniversary's coming up. And the Heights anniversary, their 100th anniversary being annexed for Houston, is coming up in a couple of years. I recommend to any business that you pick an anniversary, and it doesn't have to be 100 years. It could be 15, whatever. You celebrate the heck out of it. It becomes your marketing opportunity. It also becomes your stakeholder building opportunity, because most companies in this era of social media understand the value of building your stakeholder base. But when you have a party to recognize your stakeholders, that's an anniversary.
Speaking of anniversaries, we're coming up on our 100th show.
Yes, we are.
100th show.
You will be invited to the party.
Shameless marketing.
Yeah.
Yes, shameless plug.
Well, Rice University just had its 100th anniversary. MD Anderson's got its 75th coming up. So anniversaries are big deals.
February 28th will be our 100th show. And it is going to be a crazy show. We can promise that.
You want to
already.
invite everyone who's been on it before.
Absolutely.
Have this place filled, with
Say, that's a great idea.
Well,
We should look into that, guys.
We're actually going to hold it at Lucho, and we're going to invite everybody on who's been on, and we're going to record the show that night at the party.
You could do that, yes.
And then we'll just replay it the next morning.
That's something that's from
We're
the
going to
past.
record the show early in the night before anybody's had a chance to drink.
That's something from the past.
We want to get them when they walk in.
When I started in radio, we used to do live remotes. The first live remote I ever did was from a hamburger stand in Austin, Texas in 1959. And they had just opened a counter at that hamburger stand. And there was this old man named Colonel Sanders who was there opening his 4th franchise. And there's an article I wrote about that called The Colonel and Me. And here is an 11-year-old guy. I'm interviewing Colonel Sanders. And I didn't know anything about being a senior citizen and running a business and all of that. But he was so kind and so instructional. He gave me ideas that I've now given the world's largest companies. And this was standing at a counter at a hamburger stand in Austin, Texas.
And then he started his career at 65 years of age.
Yes,
I mean,
that's what he was that year. He had just launched Kentucky Fried Chicken. And ironically, that was 1959. The irony was 20 years later, 1979, after the Colonel died, I was hired by the board of directors of KFC Corp. The board chair at that time was John Y. Brown, who was married to Phyllis George, the former Miss America from Denton. And he later became the governor of Kentucky. And it was how to restructure the company after the death of the Colonel, who I had met 20 years before at a hamburger stand called 2J's in Austin, Texas. It all comes back to listening to those old timers because they'll give you the best wisdom, and then it becomes yours, and then you teach other people.
Well, the legends of the future, you start looking at people who did all these .com companies and all these apps and all these things. Those are going to be the legends of 20 and 30 years from now.
Some of them are legends in their own mind, but
we won't be talking about those people.
I was advising the .com industry a number of years ago when they were all full of themselves, and I said, you've got to have sustainability. You can't be this year's flash in the pan, and the word technology by itself is not going to make people roll down and give money.
Well, Amazon
it's all
was one of the
about being a
survivors of
solid
that.
company.
Yeah. Amazon was hemorrhaging red ink for years, even after, and they managed to survive, and now they're just amazing.
And where Jeff Bezos got the will to do that? During those years he lived in Houston. He doesn't necessarily claim that he got it going to River Oaks Elementary School, but he would go out and spend weekends at his grandfather's ranch down near Victoria, down there. And he claimed that punching cattle and learning how to do all of that real salt of the earth kind of stuff, that's where he got his leadership lessons.
That was amazing. We're coming up, we're like 2.5 minutes left of the show.
That is correct.
And so we typically like to ask, what would you want to leave everyone with your appearance here today?
Don't let the past be overtaken, because it does recover. It comes back. Recessions come back. Bad things come back, but mainly good things. I have a concept called 3 rights offset of wrong. I go into companies and study companies. I call it institutional review, and there's more right going on in companies than people give themselves credit for having.
Yep.
And I would say the real give back is don't think that history applies towards someone else. Go to www.houstonlegends.net, get the event, get the book, because it won't be available nationally until May or June. Then you consider companies could certainly purchase copies. Companies could have events. The more you learn from history, then you become the future. I think that's what I learned as far back as 1958 when I started, as a DJ, then White House, and it was all the same thing, and in fact, when I was in school at UT in the 60s, that my teachers used to say, "What do you do? You're never here." And I used to say, "I'm a White House advisor and a disc jockey." And she said, "Both?" And I said, "Yeah, it's the same thing, believe me." But history can keep coming back and back and back and back for the usually 90% for the best reasons. So when you have that 100 show recognition coming up, think of all the other shows that have had 100 show recognitions. Ed Sullivan did that. Perry Como did that. Carol Burnett, they all did 100 show recognitions. That's legends.
I would
Do
absolutely
you have an
agree.
event upcoming that you can tell people about?
Several. I'm doing several sponsored events. One of your friends in the real estate world, Beth Wolf's going to do one. I'm going to do one at River Oaks Country Club. George Strake going to do one. I'm going to be doing a bunch of business sessions in Chambers of Commerce. I'm doing the Asian Chamber of Commerce on April 9th, and the Hispanic Chamber. And I'm going to have legends from the book with me.
You know, I want to leave with one last quote. It says, Houston is merely a city in embryo. That's from the Telegraph and Texas Register. Hank, it's a pleasure having you on board today.
It was
We
awesome.
have run out of time, and time flies when you're having fun. Until next time, we are out.
Great show.
And you've been listening to the Real Estate Rat Pack. The question is, who's Frank, who's Sammy, who's Dean, and who's the other guy?
Chris is
I'm
Frank,
I'm
he's
Dean.
Dean, and I'm Sammy.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So tune in to the really big show every Saturday at 9 a.m. right here on 100.7 The Word, KKHT.